There is one behavior you lean on that feels like emotional self-defense, like you're protecting your dignity, your boundaries, your sense of self. It feels smart. It feels justified. It even feels empowering in the moment. But it is quietly doing the opposite. It is keeping you locked in a cycle you want out of, replaying the same emotional sentences, like a prison term that keeps renewing itself. And here's the trap. You don't experience it as confinement. You experience it as identity. You don't see it as a pattern. You see it as your proof, your argument, your emotional receipts. It whispers, I have every right to feel this way. And it drowns out the bigger question. Is this feeling freeing me or finishing my sentence? You think you're guarding yourself. You're not. You're guarding the cage. Let's slow it down for 1 second. Not into analysis yet, just awareness. Think about a moment that genuinely frustrated you recently. Not a life-shattering moment, just one of those emotional sparks that hits fast and personal. Maybe you felt blamed for something you didn't do, or defined by a reaction you didn't choose, or evaluated in a way that felt like someone read the wrong file on you. And what happens inside you? There's no pause, no curiosity, no distance. There is a surge, a psychological reflex that doesn't ask questions. It prepares answers. It starts building the defense before the moment even finishes speaking. You collect evidence in your mind. You rehearse the conversation you wish you had. You explain yourself internally, sometimes passionately, sometimes angrily, sometimes exhaustingly. Not to understand the wound, but to validate it. And this is where Jung becomes your backseat voice of clarity, reminding you, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. You're not stuck because you feel too deeply. You're stuck because you defend too quickly. You're not trapped by emotion itself. You're trapped by the habit of never questioning the emotional jailer. But before we analyze anything, let me describe a moment you already know too well. You get criticized, even lightly. Maybe someone comments on something you did, or points out a flaw, or just doesn't see things your way. And instantly, something inside you flares. Not to pause, not to reflect, not to ask, why did that hit me? But to defend, to protect, to justify. You replay the scene over and over in your head. You change the wording, tweak the tone, imagine every comeback. You strengthen your internal argument. You collect evidence that proves you were right, or misunderstood, or justified. Every detail of the moment becomes a piece of proof that you are the one who should be seen, heard, and respected. And here's the catch. It's exhausting. You spend hours, sometimes days, in this mental loop, reliving every angle of the event. You're not solving the conflict. You're not learning anything. You're not growing. You're just polishing your case like a lawyer for your own hurt. You tell yourself, I just need to be understood. I just need them to see why this hurt. But in reality, the more you defend it, the more it defines you. The more it solidifies the story you're telling yourself. This is who I am. This is what I've endured. This is why I'm justified. And the irony? While you're building that defense, the moment itself has already moved on. The person who triggered it may not even be thinking about it anymore. But you're trapped, endlessly circling, guarding your emotional armor like it's a treasure chest, when really it's the lock on your own cage. You don't even notice it at first. You think it's protection. You think it's survival. But deep down, if you're honest, it's fatigue, frustration, and a gnawing sense that nothing ever changes. no matter how hard you defend yourself. And here it is, the lock, the pattern, the behavior that sneaks in under your radar and keeps you trapped. You defend your pain instead of questioning it. Think about it. Every time you rehearse the argument, every time you justify your hurt, every time you polish your story of being wronged, you're strengthening the cage, not dismantling it. You identify with the wound. You argue for the wound. You protect it like it's a fragile treasure. You treat it like it defines you, instead of seeing it as something you experienced. It becomes your identity, your evidence, your shield, your comfort zone, all at once. And the crazy thing, it feels safe, feels justified, feels like who you are. But here's the truth. When you define yourself through the wound never leaves. You become a curator of your own pain museum. Every reaction, every resentment, every frustration becomes a display. Look at what happened to me. Look at how valid my anger is. Look at how the world keeps doing this to me. And because you're defending it, you don't see the bars around your own mind. You don't see how you're repeating the same patterns. You don't see that the moment for change is already slipping past you while you're busy arguing that the hurt was fair, real, justified. You think you're surviving the pain, but really, you're sustaining it. And that's the lock. That's the behavior. That's the invisible prison you didn't know you were building. One internal argument at a time. Jung said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." Pause on that for a second. Think about it. You've spent so much energy defining yourself by what hurt you, by the moments you felt wronged, by the events you defend in your head over and over again. That's the story you tell yourself about who you are. And it's comfortable, because defending the wound feels like control. It feels like identity. But here's the twist. You can't step into a new version of yourself while you're busy guarding the old one. Every argument you run in your mind, every justification, every defense, it's like building walls in a room you're trying to escape. You're stacking the bricks with your own hands. You're not trapped by what happened. You're trapped by your refusal to question it, to investigate it, to see it differently. Jung reminds us that identity isn't what happens to you. Identity is what you choose to create, to explore, to build beyond the automatic loops of defense. And the big question is, will you choose curiosity over defense? Will you step out of the courtroom of your own mind and finally start asking questions instead of just arguing answers? Because that one choice, to stop defending and start exploring, is the first key to unlocking the door. Now imagine this happening again. A similar situation, maybe weeks or months later. The trigger is slightly different, but the reaction is eerily familiar. That old surge of frustration, defensiveness, and internal argument rises almost automatically. You think, here we go again, and you brace yourself. Not to understand, not to learn, not to grow, but to defend, to protect your version of the story, your identity, your evidence. You rehearse the conversation in your head before it even starts. You anticipate the criticism. You polish your counterpoints. You hold on to the narrative that proves you were right the first time, and every time after. And while all of this is happening, the real opportunity slips by. The moment where reflection could happen, where insight could arise, where you could actually see the pattern forming. It passes unnoticed, because your mind is busy running a courtroom for your own wounds. You're not noticing the chain. You're noticing the individual link. You're defending the link instead of questioning the chain. It's exhausting, isn't it? You feel tired. You feel stuck. You feel like nothing changes. And the irony is, it doesn't change. Not because the world is relentless, but because your defense keeps it in place. Every time this happens, the pattern strengthens. The emotional prison isn't built by someone else. It's built by your own repeated habits of defending rather than questioning. And here's the kicker. The moment you start interrogating the pattern instead of defending it, the prison starts to feel a little less permanent. You start to see the bars you are stacking yourself. Here's the deeper truth Jung was pointing to. Growth doesn't come from comfort. It doesn't come from proving your point, defending your pain, or holding tightly to the narrative of what happened to you. Growth comes from friction, from tension, from the moments that make you uncomfortable, frustrated, or even angry. These moments aren't enemies. They're signals. They're data points your psyche uses to push you forward. But when you spend all your energy defending yourself, the signals get lost. The lessons get buried under arguments and justifications. You see, Jung believed that the unconscious isn't trying to attack you. It's trying to guide you. It nudges you toward insight, awareness, and change. But only if you're willing to look, to question, to sit in the discomfort instead of polishing the wound. When you defend the pain, you treat friction as an enemy. You react, resist, and reinforce the old pattern. You never ask, why does this hurt me so consistently? What is it protecting? What would happen if I let go of defending it? You're not trapped by the hurt itself. You're trapped by your refusal to step outside it, to investigate it, to see it as something separate from your identity. And here's the irony. The very thing you think is protecting you, the thing you defend so fiercely, is the very thing keeping you from becoming what you could be. Growth begins the moment you stop defending and start asking. That's where the door starts to creak open, and then it happens again. A similar trigger, maybe slightly different circumstances, but the same old surge of frustration, the same reflex to defend, the same internal argument you've run 100 times before. It feels automatic, like your mind has a shortcut built just for this. The same frustration, the same irritation, the same replayed story of being wronged. And every time, it leaves you exhausted and stuck. You think, why does this keep happening? Why can't I just move past this? But the truth is, it's not happening to you. It's happening because of you. Or more specifically, because of the habit you've created, defending the pain instead of questioning it. And here's the sneaky part. You don't even realize it's a habit. You feel justified. You feel right. You feel like you're protecting yourself. But in reality, you're reinforcing the same cage you're trying to escape. Every trigger becomes a reminder of the pattern. Every interaction is colored by the last wound. And because you defend so hard, the opportunity for insight, for curiosity, for growth keeps slipping by. Not because the world is relentless, not because others are against you, but because your own mind keeps recycling the same defensive loops. And the more you defend it, the more permanent it feels. The bars feel solid, unbreakable, unavoidable. Until, that is, you decide to question the very thing you've been defending all along. Here's the truth. Emotional freedom doesn't start with healing in a way most people think. It doesn't start with fixing the past or rewriting the story. It starts with curiosity. The moment you stop defending the wound and start asking questions, the cage begins to crack. Because curiosity is active, it's investigative. It's the opposite of defense. Instead of thinking,
I need to prove I'm right. You start asking, what is this reaction protecting me from? Who am I if I let go of the story I've been telling myself about this pain? What payoff do I get
From holding on to this hurt that I'm too afraid to lose? What would happen if I just let the moment exist without arguing with it? These questions are small, but they're seismic. They shift the energy from defense to exploration. And that shift is everything. You begin to see your own patterns, your own automatic reactions, your own mental loops. You start noticing the bars you were stacking with every defensive argument. And for the first time, you realize the door was never locked from the outside. You were holding the key all along. The breakthrough isn't dramatic. It doesn't happen in one moment of clarity. It's quiet. It's subtle. It's noticing, pausing, and asking yourself questions you've never dared to ask before. And here's the wildest part. Once you start asking, once you start exploring instead of defending, everything changes. Not because the world changes, not because people change, but because you've changed how you show up. You stop reinforcing the prison. You start mapping the exit. You start becoming what Jung meant when he said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." Because choice always exists, even when the cage feels permanent. Because here's the thing. Once you start asking the right questions, once you pause the defense just long enough to get curious, everything starts to shift. The prison you thought was solid, the bars you thought were permanent, they start to look less intimidating. They start to feel like something you stacked yourself, and now, something you can dismantle. It's subtle at first. Maybe you notice a little more space in your mind, a little less reactivity. Maybe you stop rehearsing every argument before it even happens. Maybe you catch yourself defending less, questioning more. And then, the moment hits. You realize the door was never locked from the outside. It was always in your hands. That realization, that tiny electric moment, is the key, the shift, the beginning of freedom. But here's the cliffhanger. Will you keep defending the bars, or will you step into the curiosity that opens them? Because the choice is yours, and it starts the moment you decide to ask, not defend. Now let's get to the moment of choice. This is the turning point, the place where everything shifts from theory to reality. It's the moment you realize you don't have to defend the wound anymore. You don't have to replay the argument, rehearse the conversation, or protect the story of your pain. You don't even have to understand it fully. You just have to notice it. You can pause, take a breath. Ask, what is this really about? What am I defending here? What happens if I let go? And here's the surprising part. Letting go doesn't mean the pain disappears instantly. It doesn't mean you suddenly stop feeling hurt, frustrated, or triggered. But it does mean you stop reinforcing the pattern that keeps it permanent. You stop giving the wound the energy it needs to run your life. This is where freedom begins. In the quiet choice to step back, observe, and question. In the moment where you could keep defending, or you could start asking. Imagine for a second what would happen if you made that choice consistently. The triggers that once controlled you lose their grip. The arguments in your head start to fade. The cage you've been trapped in begins to feel less solid, more like a puzzle you can solve. And the incredible part? You realize it wasn't external events that held you captive. It was your own pattern of defending, rehearsing, and proving. The moment of choice is simple, yet radical.
It's the single action that begins the shift from being a prisoner to being an observer, an investigator, someone who can finally start
building a new way forward. Because every big change starts small. Every breakthrough begins with a single pause. Every freedom begins with one courageous question. Here's the secret most people overlook. Real change, real emotional freedom, doesn't happen in the heat of defense. It doesn't happen while your mind is rehearsing every argument, defending every slight, protecting every wound. It happens in the pause, that brief, almost imperceptible space between the trigger and your reaction. That's where the power lives. Think about it. Every time something frustrates you, irritates you, or hits a sore spot, there's a tiny fraction of a second where the choice exists. In that moment, you can react automatically, like you always do, lashing out mentally, rehearsing your defense, spinning the story over and over again. Or you can pause. Just pause. Take a breath. Notice the physical sensation in your body, the thoughts racing through your mind, the urge to defend yourself. Notice it without judgment. Just notice it. This is the crucial difference. The pause isn't about ignoring your feelings, pretending they don't exist, or suppressing your frustration. The pause is about observing, watching the pattern without automatically jumping in to protect it. Watching the story your mind is telling you, the evidence you're collecting, the narrative you're polishing, and realizing it's not the truth, it's a habit. And here's the beauty of it. The more you practice this pause, the more you realize that most of the emergencies you've been reacting to aren't emergencies at all. The things you've been defending so fiercely often aren't attacks. They're opportunities. Opportunities to understand yourself, to see your patterns, to step out of the cage you've been building around your own mind. Every pause is a small rebellion against the autopilot of defense. It's a tiny act of freedom in the midst of habitual reaction. And over time, those small acts accumulate. One pause leads to another. One conscious choice leads to a second. One moment of observation leads to awareness of the pattern. And suddenly, the mental cage you thought was permanent begins to feel like a puzzle you can solve. It's not about perfection. You're not expected to pause every single time. You will slip. You will defend. You will replay the argument in your head. But the pause isn't about being perfect. It's about building a muscle of awareness, of curiosity, of choice. And that muscle is stronger than the strongest argument you could ever rehearse. In the pause, you start to see the real patterns forming in your life. You notice the triggers that keep repeating. You see the stories you tell yourself over and over. You begin to recognize the automatic loops that have defined your reactions for years. And when you see them, you have a choice. You can keep running the same loop, or you can step out and ask the questions that break it. Questions like, what is this reaction protecting? Why am I so quick to defend? What would happen if I let this moment exist without arguing with it? The pause is the doorway to these questions. Without it, the questions never arrive. Without it, you remain a prisoner of your own repeated defenses. And here's the final point. The pause is radical in its simplicity. It's small, it's subtle, it's almost invisible, but it carries the weight of liberation. One pause doesn't just stop an automatic reaction. It interrupts the chain. It cracks the habit. It opens space for insight, for choice, for transformation. The more you practice it, the more natural it becomes. Eventually, you start noticing triggers before they escalate.
You catch yourself in the act of defending. You step back before the argument starts, before the frustration spirals. And in those moments, you experience freedom. Not the dramatic, sudden kind, but the slow, accumulating, profound kind that changes how you live day to day. This is where growth really begins. Not in the heat of reaction, not in the endless mental courtroom of justification. Growth begins in the pause, in the space between what happens and how you respond.